Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where things are pretty slow right now because all of Hollywood has been focused on the Emmys for the past couple of days, which of course has to do with television. So I've managed to cobble together an episode today, and what do you know, 2 of the 3 stories have to do with television. But anyway, let's start out with a story that has to do with comics, and that's Marvel Comics, which got Black Panther trending yesterday, which is very interesting, not only because of the story itself, but because, of course, Kevin Feige just recently divorced himself from Marvel Comics. He left Marvel Comics and Marvel TV on the East Coast and is building his own little empire on the West Coast. Well, not little, it's quite expansive, and we'll see how he does running things solo. But you do have to wonder if there's a little bit of showmanship involved here, that Marvel Comics is the one that was able to get Black Panther trending, and Kevin Feige is still kind of sitting on his hands when it comes to that project. He lost Ava DuVernay. She left over creative differences as the director, and he hasn't replaced her. That picture really hasn't done anything to move forward, but yet time still marches on, and its release date is getting closer and closer, as is the character's debut. Of course, T'Challa, aka Black Panther, to be played by Chadwick Boseman, will debut in Captain America Civil War this coming summer, 2016. And the big announcement from Marvel Comics is that they have a solo title, which will debut around then. They're certainly not above capitalizing off of Marvel movies, even though they now have nothing to do with them, and they've hired their writer. And this is even more interesting and makes the separation between the movies and the rest of the company even more gossipy, because they've made a very politically charged choice. Whereas, of course, again, Ava DuVernay walked away from Black Panther over creative differences, and considering how political she is, one has to assume that the creative differences were political. This guy is almost the male version, in many ways, of Ava DuVernay that they've picked to write the title. And I think he's actually a very good choice. There's a larger discussion about black writers in comics as well, which we'll get to in just a moment. But first, let's start out talking about Ta-Nehisi Coates. Ta-Nehisi Coates is yet another writer outside of comics being brought into comics to try and get more people to pay attention to comics. A lot of people, unfortunately, watch the movies, watch the TV shows, but it doesn't turn them into comic book readers. And so, since they have such small sales numbers, they lose a lot of weight in arguments about these characters. You're seeing that in both Marvel and DC, and there's a real danger of the more lucrative divisions, namely movies, really taking control of the characters away from the comic book creators. And so they're trying very hard to even things out. I mean, if the comic book sold more numbers, would it have been so easy for Kevin Feige to divorce from the comic book part of the business? Maybe not. But anyway, but I have to say, at least Ta-Nehisi Coates is a comic book lover. He reads comics himself. There have been a number of writers who have been brought into comics, as I just said, to raise the profile of them, but it often doesn't work out. For instance, I forget the lady's name, of course, because it didn't work out, but they brought in like this really successful novelist to write Wonder Woman, and that was just an absolute disaster. I mean, it's really difficult to switch mediums, even, things that seem related like TV to movies. It's a skill to work in each different medium. There's rules, there's rhythm, and it takes some getting used to. So I think that Ta-Nehisi Coates could still be off to a rough start because he's never written comics before, but at least he reads them. I think that's really important. But Ta-Nehisi Coates, again, as I said, is very political. So who is he? Well, he's a very highly respected journalist. He writes for The Atlantic, and also he's a novelist. And he really basically writes about the black experience in America today and in the past. And for instance, one of his tweets, when they were covering him being announced as the new writer, he said, Wakanda demands reparations from Namor. Namor owes us. And I thought that was great. I was like, oh, that's really a cool thing to introduce there. I think that bringing up that Black Panther rules Wakanda, he's a political leader, is a really important part of the character, and I think that Wakanda is as important a part of Black Panther lore, the character's lore, as like Gotham is to Batman. So it's a really important, and I hope that they've developed that character more in some of the other people who populate Wakanda. Just like Gotham is so rich because it has James Gordon, all these other GCPD members, often the Court of Owls that's been rounded out. Very interesting, very rich history, and I'd like to see that develop for Wakanda. Wakanda. But I like taking a real-world idea like reparations and applying it to Wakanda. I thought that was really clever. And also, it's been announced that Ta-Nehisi Coates' first storyline, or his only storyline if this doesn't work out, will be about Black Panther trying to squash an uprising in Wakanda. So it's going to be very politically charged, which I think is great. And the image that was released for Marvel, I don't know if it's official or not because they didn't make an official statement about this, but it has T'Challa, I think in Wakanda, a very scientific city background and the Wakandan flag's on fire behind him. But, they borrowed some buildings from actually the London skyline there, so I don't know if it's Wakanda for sure, but the Wakandan flags make me feel that it is. But that's been a big item of debate. What will Wakanda look like in the movies? Because they've shot all those scenes on that outdoor set that seems to be set somewhere in Africa, and it is certainly not the advanced scientific society that we know in the comics. But anyway, I decided to read an article that Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote about reparations. And I was in The Atlantic. I'll put a link to it actually below in the video description. And it was shocking. It was very well researched. It was very even-handed. And it was a really good, really eye-opening article. And it just shows how much of history, and I'm sure not just, the history of Black people in this country, but all kinds of history. I think it just goes to show how poorly today we're educated about what's happened in the past, right? So many things are swept under the rug. It's absolutely shocking and appalling. But it's a very, very, very good article. And so I think clearly he's been brought on to add that political element to the character, to make him relatable. But what's interesting is, I do think that it flies in the face of the Ava DuVernay situation again, and I do think that we'll see how this is received. But maybe Marvel shouldn't have been so quick to disagree with Ava DuVernay, especially considering all the attention that this got. Right, like people were excited about this, and someone could argue that Black Panther shouldn't be political. Right, I think there's certainly some people who will make that argument down below. But it's a character, the first Black comic book lead character in the history of comics, mainstream. His name is Black Panther. It's obviously derived from the political movement, the very controversial political movement. And Wakanda is really very much a city on a hill. It shows an advanced society in Africa that's scientifically advanced. It is a city that is, that Wakanda can stand on par with the most advanced nations of the world. And that's really important. And I think it's important to people who like Black Panther. I think his audience isn't huge right now, but for those people who are fans, that's an important part of it. And that needs to be represented, and I think that it's important. I think that pop culture can be powerful, pop culture can be inspirational, and I think you can't divorce that from the Black Panther character as easily as you can divorce yourself from the comics and TV division of your company. But anyway, Joe Illidge, who I actually happen to personally know from my time working in the comic book business, covers a lot of Black talent issues for comic book resources. And so he was quoted extensively with this coverage yesterday, talking about the fact that historically, Black writers haven't been put on the main titles, right? Like, they aren't put on Batman, they aren't put on Wonder Woman, they aren't put on, Captain America, Iron Man, etc., etc. And that's true, by the way. But he said that's because there's always this idea that they're going to add their own political agenda to that. And so I don't know how he was relating it to this context, because clearly there's a huge political agenda here, but rightfully so. But I do think that's true, but I think that it won't be disproven until someone's given the chance to disprove it, right? It's like, what came first, the chicken or the egg? So we'll see. I think just as in any business, money is what ultimately speaks the loudest, and if Black Panther is a big seller, you will see, more stuff working out, more opportunities for diverse talent. But anyway, it's a very interesting development, and right now it's like, your turn, Feige, because right now people are talking about Black Panther in the comics, not on the big screen. So I'm curious, what do you think of this choice? Do you pick up the Black Panther comic? And what do you think of the way the comic's developing as opposed to the way the movie's developing? Although the movie isn't really developing, and that's interesting in and of itself. All right, so that's the first story of the day. Now, the second story, as I said, the second two stories are TV related because there's nothing else going on. And the second one, it's kind of a mix, because there's a Jack Ryan TV show that's being shopped around. Jack Ryan, of course, the popular movie franchise character, originally played by Alec Baldwin, then very popularly by Harrison Ford, then blink and you miss it, Ben Affleck, and then a total failure by Chris Pine. Really, I think that, they're trying to play it off that no one really defines the character on the big screen, but I think it's Harrison Ford. But luckily for them, Harrison Ford defined so many characters, Jack Ryan's at the end of that list. After, of course, Han Solo and then Indiana Jones, you can debate that order of the first two. So But they want to do a Jack Ryan TV series because clearly the movie franchise is dead. And this is very popular. A lot of people want this, which I'm surprised because it seems a little bit like a Homeland ripoff. Like there are a lot of CIA shows, and I'm not quite sure how they would distinguish this and make it interesting. But anyway, the talent involved is pretty impressive. Carlton Cuse wants to, as part of this team, this package. He wrote the script for San Andreas, which, as you might recall, I thought was a very well-written movie. But on TV, he worked on Lost, most famously, Bates Motel. He does The Strain with Guillermo del Toro. So he has a history working with top-notch talent in the film division. But then and that continues here because the other partner that he's working with is Michael Bay. And Michael Bay, this is very interesting because Michael Bay has become quite the businessman. He, of course, still directs movies, and it looks like they're pulling him back in potentially for the next Transformers 5. He says he's only still in talks, but he is in talks. But he produces a lot of horror films, so he's very prolific in that capacity. And also he's moved into TV. He has Black Sails and also The Last Ship. And Black Sails, but The Last Ship I think actually has a pretty strong following. So anyway, if this ties him in more heavily with Paramount, because Paramount, of course, does the Transformers movies, and this would be a Paramount TV series, because this is part of Paramount's new TV division, which started about 2 years ago. And they're basically, instead of developing original shows, just trying to do TV versions of their popular movie franchises, or movie franchises that they feel they can't continue on the big screen, so let's bring them over to the small screen. And the reason I bring this up is because Minority Report is their first show, and it was just announced that it was a huge flop. Nobody tuned in to watch it. So not exactly the wonderful start that I'm sure they wanted for their TV career. But they also have School of Rock in develop. I think it's going to premiere soon on Nickelodeon as a TV series. And then also Galaxy Quest they're developing for Amazon streaming. And Amazon, of course, is doing very well. Just won some Emmys. And actually, I believe I just saw in the news they're having a sale on their original content or their streaming content to celebrate. But I think I'm curious to see how a Jack Ryan TV series would do. I think it's interesting to see not only movie stars and directors who are in need of a little bit of a pick me up. I've tried to combine terms, but a pick me up. Going to the small screen. Now you're starting to see characters go to the small screen as well for a pick me up, and Jack Ryan is one of them. So I'm curious, would you watch a Jack Ryan TV show? I don't know. It just seems so generic. There's all like the CSIs. There's like Black Hat. Just so many different shows that kind of cover the same ground. I don't know how Jack Ryan's going to distinguish itself. So anyway, and especially if it's a network show. So anyway, that's the second story of the day. And I'm curious, would you watch a Jack Ryan TV show? And what do you think of Jack Ryan being taken off the big screen? And what do you think of the talent involved? And what do you think that Michael Bay, you just can't keep that guy down? All right, so the third story is my reaction to Scream Queens, which aired last night. I decided to watch it. It was like the big show. I watched The Muppets too. The Muppets started out really weak, and I felt got better and better. Although I'm sick of the talk show format right now because there's just so many of them. And The Muppets, of course, takes place on the set of Miss Piggy's talk show. But anyway, we're going to focus on Scream Queens because it's kind of movie-like because it has some movie talent involved. Anyway, again, there's really nothing else going on. I could have talked about Sean Penn's lawsuit, I guess, but that's also TV-related. So anyway, Scream Queens is basically like the teen version, the Gossip Girl version of American Horror Story. It's like watered down for network television and for those people who don't want to watch American Horror Story, like myself, who tried to watch it, got so creeped out in the first 5 minutes of the very first episode that I had to turn it off. And I might return for Lady Gaga, we'll see. But anyway, Scream Queens was much more my speed. And I think it was very similar to the Scream TV show, actually, with the succession, with the rapid pace in which it moved forward and the kills. People get killed very quickly. And just like with the original Scream, it's a smart way to get big name talent to show up on your show, but without a large commitment, right? Come on my show, have a great scene, have a great couple of scenes, have an amazing death scene, and then go on your way. And that happened last night. I don't want to give away who the murder was in case you want to watch it, but the particular death scene was actually it was true to form, a very clever death scene. I love the texting between the victim and the killer, because the killer didn't have a voice box, so he decided to text back and forth with his victim, and she played along, which I thought was both hilarious and a commentary on today's society. Sure, it's cheesy. It's got a lot of chewing the screen scenery, but I still thought it was fun, basically. But I do think it borrows very heavily from Scream the most, and I'm curious how MTV feels about that because they, of course, have their own Scream, actual, authentic Scream sanctioned TV series. But I wanted to give a shout out. I think that there's a lot of talent on this show. I like Keke Palmer. I was very glad to tune in for her. I thought she didn't have too much to do, so we'll see if her role expands going forward. But I thought the standouts in the first 2 episodes, they basically made like a little movie by putting 2 episodes back to back. But I thought Emma Roberts has really found her niche as playing the mean girl. She, of course, did that in Scream 4. It's getting so meta, and I think she did a nice job. I saw a lot of people accuse her of not doing a very good job acting, but I think that Emma Roberts can really only do one thing, and this is it, and I personally think she does it pretty well. I think Nick Jonas was surprisingly good, and as I tweeted last night, kind of gave Emma Roberts a run for her money as Queen Biatch. I can't quite censor as I can on Twitter, talking, but I thought that he did a very good job. I thought his character was very interesting, and I thought that Nick Jonas took a lot of risks with his performance. Then I thought Jamie Lee Curtis had some of the best lines of the night. I was really impressed with Jamie Lee Curtis and how game she was. Someone tweeted me back and said everybody's just really willing to play along and the whole cast is game, and I would agree with that. But then the real surprise to me was Glen Powell, who plays Chad. And I really liked his character quite a bit. I thought Chad was hilarious. If you miss like Stephen Colbert's original Colbert Report character, this is like the younger heartthrob version of that character. And I really kind of thought he was real. I thought his lines were very funny, very on point, and I was really impressed because Glen Powell, I was watching the show, and I was like, where do I know Glen Powell from? So I was checking out his credits. He's an actor slash stuntman, and I was really surprised to see that he was in The Expendables 3, which I saw. And I thought back to The Expendables 3, and I was like, oh yeah, I remember Glen Powell. He was absolutely awful in that show. That movie. I was like, why is he in this movie? Stuntmen, that's why they can't make the transition from stunt work to acting. They just clearly don't have the skill set. It's like just because you're good at one thing doesn't mean you're good at another. But I have to say, apologies to Glen Powell because his work as Chad is just absolutely amazing. His comedic timing is superb. He pulls off lines that I think many other actors would make really unlikable, but he makes them really, really funny. So he just was looking for the right role. And I think this points out, Viola Davis made a very iconic Emmy speech about, the opportunities need to be available. Just because the talent is there in the acting category doesn't mean it will get the opportunities it should have if the writers, the people who are writing the shows, aren't writing work for them. I know that Chad is a white male, which obviously a lot of you get upset whenever I say that someone needs to make allowances for, white males, but I think allowances need to be made for everyone. And so this great role was written, and Glen Powell was lucky enough to get it, and it shows that he is a good actor. He just, he wasn't allowed to show his strong suit in The Expendables, where he just obviously isn't a good action hero. But he's a very good narcissistic, conservative, comedic character. So I thought he was great. Really liked it, and I think that's another great example of the importance of just writing a lot of different types of roles, not the same old, and allowing actors to blossom with those unique opportunities, which shouldn't be so unique. All right, so those are the 3 stories for the day, and I have a viewer question, again, about China. People are becoming more and more interested in China as it becomes more involved, not just in the box office headlines, but saves a number of our beloved films. Mad Max is still yet to open in China, and I probably will not, which is quite sad, and it would have helped the movie considerably. And of course, people are very excited for movies like Ant-Man to open there and to boost their numbers even more. I believe Inside Out is also scheduled to still hit China. So anyway, Mr. PSP1 fan had a question about China. So he says, "Hey Grace, my name is Daniel, and first of all, let me just say I love your videos, particularly morning movie news. And I had a question that I really wanted to ask, and I hope you answer it for me." Happy to. Thank you for the question, Daniel. So Daniel says, "I live in El Salvador, a really small country in Central America, with a population of roughly 8 to 9 million people. And my question is as follows. I always hear you say that China is the biggest juggernaut when it comes to box office numbers. Movies always do great, or at least good, when they open in China. And I was shocked to hear you say not long ago that Ant-Man still hasn't opened there. Because here in El Salvador, we always get movies at the same time as America, or even a week earlier, which was the case with The Avengers, 50 Shades of Grey, and Catching Fire. Why don't movies open earlier in China, where they can obviously make a lot more money in comparison to box office numbers from a country like mine? Sorry for my terrible English, I try. Your English is great, Daniel. As I said before, every time someone apologizes for their English, they almost always have great English. But Daniel continues saying, oh, have a great day, Grace, and keep up the good work, and I'm particularly excited for your review of Suicide Squad next year. Me too! All right, so Daniel, great question, and I think this, again, just like we talked about limited releases yesterday, I think it's important to talk about China's very unique release situation. So China is a communist country. It's not a free market. So it's like you have to play by China's rules or not at all. Which is one of the reasons you see Hollywood pandering so highly to China. But anyway, as our countries have some problems with, piracy and cyber attacks. But anyway, China really very much wants to protect its own movie industry. So they really position foreign releases in a way that will benefit the local films, right? They often will put two foreign big juggernauts against each other, open in the same weekend, so they cannibalize each other, and then they have a weekend all to itself for a local film. So there's a lot of that kind of jockeying, not jockeying, I guess positioning is the correct term, positioning of foreign films, again, to benefit the local releases, to make sure that foreign fare doesn't dominate the box office in China. It's very important to China that China make its own films and its own films succeed, especially the propaganda ones, apparently, as we recently discussed. So that's one of the reasons that movies don't open on time. They have to wait for China to give them a release date that China deems appropriate, right? So they're totally at the mercy of China's film commission, which is run by the government, to decide when a movie opens. Also, China, again to protect its own local films, will only accept a limited number of Hollywood movies. So your movie just might not open in China. They might just say no, like they did with Mad Max. And they also delayed the opening of Mockingjay because they had very serious problems with political commentary in the film. So they significantly delayed that movie, probably to let some of the enthusiasm run out of it, right? In the news cycle to go away. Also, while we're all discussing these movies, China, of course, is a closed system. Some people manage to get out of it, obviously, but it's a closed system in terms of discussions. They don't have Twitter. I don't believe they have YouTube. So it's difficult. Again, some people are able to access it, I think, illegally. If you're all from the Chinese region, please educate us down below about what's going on there in terms of accessibility to outside publicity. But these movies seem like new releases when they open in China. That's also an important thing to remember, right? I don't think they're aware of getting the movies so late. They kind of probably know because they live in China that, things are very regulated, but I think it doesn't feel that way. Of course, obviously, really great ad campaigns are launched to coincide with the Chinese release date for these movies. For instance, they just released the Chinese Ant-Man poster because the film is just about to open there. So that's my answer to your question. It's all about a communist system, a closed market that's trying to very much regulate outside content in an effort to protect its own image and local film industry. All right, so I hope that answers your question, Daniel. Thank you so much. And again, America goes along with it because there's just so much money at play, and it helps box office records be broken, right? Even if they only get 25% of that revenue, actually. All right, so that's today's morning movie news. Thank you so much for your question, Daniel. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Please write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories and that viewer question, anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow, and any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.